And I think often, we choose to disagree with that reality. If we have an upset customer or something like that, we say, oh, that didn't really happen. That's not a productive kind of stance to take, because their reality is their reality. Their perception is their perception. That is their experience.
A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Hey, thank you for clicking play on this episode of the B2B Growth Show. My name is Ethan Beute. I host the CX series here on the show. You're about to spend some time with Mike Redbord, a gentleman who spent a decade at HubSpot and is currently the general manager of their ServiceHub. In our conversation, he articulates so well and so clearly how to create and deliver a better customer experience, how to change CX from a function to a feeling, how to accept that the customer's reality is the reality, and how we can own up to bad experiences, how we need to unlock the value of social proof to close down the trust gap, doing things that don't scale, recording videos to humanize our experience, and so much more. So let's get into it. All right, if you want to learn how and why to turn your best customers into your best marketers, you're in the right place. You're going to love this episode of the Customer Experience Podcast because today's guest has spent nearly a decade at HubSpot. Most of that time, he served as a vice president, working in services and support and scaling the customer team to more than 500 employees. He's currently 100% focused on customer experience as the general manager of the ServiceHub, HubSpot's new line of business. Mike Redbord, welcome to the Customer Experience Podcast.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you so much, listeners. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. I'm so excited for some of the stuff we're going to go through, especially just based on your experience. I can't imagine the change that you've seen over a decade at a company like HubSpot, but we'll get there later. We'll start where we always start here, which is your thoughts about customer experience. When I say customer experience, what does it conjure? What are its characteristics?
And so to me, the customer experience is the reality of what any one given customer experiences. So I think a lot of people in the industry, of which I'm a part, right? A lot of people in the industry try to define customer experience kind of operationally, like on a whiteboard. But to me, it's the reality. It's all the little things, all the sum of the bits of emotion and touches that a customer has with you. And the customer experience is really one thread for one customer of what they feel, what they experienced, and what their impression is, therefore, of your brand.
I love it. I've asked this question over 30 times now to smart folks such as yourself. And the layer you add here is this reality piece that you started on is like, this is real to that person. And, we can sit here internally inside the organization and debate why that happened or how that happened. But the fact of the matter is we left them with the thoughts and the feelings that created a reality for that person they're going to hold on to until we create the opportunity to change that reality or to amplify it in the case that it's a good one.
Yeah, and I think often, we choose to disagree with that reality. If we have an upset customer or something like that, we say, oh, that didn't really happen. That's not a productive kind of stance to take because their reality is their reality. Their perception is their perception. That is their experience. And so I think thinking about it as reality actually cultivates a bit of culture of like empathy, which is a super important attribute. I would say the most important attribute to delivering a really great customer experience.
Completely agree. When I talk about what I'm learning by having these conversations and sharing it internally, it really is about raising up customer empathy in more places. You find it in spots and there are places where it's really healthy, but it's not often a pervasive or prevailing attitude or posture in every seat in the house. But that's what it takes to deliver an amazing customer experience. So for folks who don't know, talk a little bit about the Service Hub. Kind of the tagline at the top of the main page there is software that turns customers into promoters and service into growth, which is a really strong promise. I love all the themes there, but talk about what you're doing there with the Service Hub.
Yeah, so if you're going to build a product, come out swinging on the tagline, right? I think that for us, the Service Hub is the culmination of over 12 years of experience at HubSpot in trying to grow our own business. And back in 2006, when we started the company, I think a lot of the way that you defined yourself to the market, to your prospective buyers, was through your marketing. And, we at HubSpot really pioneered inbound marketing and growth through blogging and, webinars and stuff like that. And I think back then, that was, in fact, a lot of the way in which you defined your brand. It was from your own voice. I think now, 12 years on, 2019 going into 2020, very soon, I think it's much more your customers that define your brand. It's the sum of their experiences that matters much more than what you say. You really can't outshout them anymore. Every company is defined by its reviews. Every company is defined by its customer reference program. And so we've just seen this really big change in how people shop and buy, and it has much more to do with the outcome of their peers' customer experiences than it does with what your salesperson says or what your marketers say. So because of that, we've now created a product to hopefully deliver delightful experiences and really kind of channel that change that we're seeing in the market to help our customers grow and grow better in a more modern way too.
Love it. You tapped into a theme that I've heard many ways. You added a different twist on it a little bit, is that we're no longer in control as businesses and companies, that it really does belong to the customer. I'm going to go one layer deeper and give you the chance to talk about something I think you enjoy talking about and presenting on, and probably that you teach and share internally as well. Talk a little bit about the underpinnings of the why behind turning our customers into our best marketers. And I think it's around this trust gap. Can you define the trust gap that exists and how that plays into all this?
Yeah, so what I just described in the last thought was really this change that we've seen over the last decade or so, where folks have gone from trusting companies and trusting salespeople and trusting you as a vendor to really distrusting you and trusting only people they know and their peers or perceived peer group on review sites or something. And so to me, that represents just a change in behavior. And like you're saying, underpinning that is what I call the trust gap. So I see it that you have a lot of messages in the marketplace, but people are just less and less receptive. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of those messages that we as people have been receiving over time, we've noticed are less than true. So when a company says nowadays, we did a bit of research recently that showed this in our state of service report recently, when a customer says we solve for the customer, we're customer first, only 12% of their prospects actually believe them, right? So the vast majority, like 88%, kind of you're starting off on the back foot with them because they disbelieve that you're customer first. Even if you actually are, they just disbelieve it because in the past they've been burned by that statement. And so I think you have this gap, and we're in a bit of a ditch on it, I think, as a sort of industry or a community of consumers and vendors, where we don't trust businesses. And as a result, we only trust other people, and we look for that kind of third-party guarantee that we're making the right decision to create certainty, because we don't trust businesses anymore because we've been burned so much over the last decade or 15 years.
So good and so well stated. It reminds me of when Seth Godin offered the television industrial complex, and it's time to move away from that. It's like, okay, so we moved in a lot of the stuff that you were talking about earlier into taking control of distribution, be able to have our own messages direct to consumer as essentially media companies through all these various platforms that have opened up. But even that now has been so apparently abused by marketers and others that it's created, some of that distrust is now moved into this new zone. Talk a little bit about some of those channels. I know you have some thoughts around social and the way that's working, around Google and some of the changes that they've made that have made acquisition difficult or demand gen difficult, that makes this community of satisfied customers so much more valuable in terms of creating new customers.
Yeah. So at a high level, when I think about growth and the way that you create growth, there's certain things certain tactics, certain points in time that work and certain ones that don't, or certain ones that are table stakes but are not like the real needle movers for your business. And so I think that, acting as a media company and having that web presence and having a blog and doing content marketing, that's all table stakes nowadays. And I see the interest moving toward social proof, and that has a lot to do with the trust conversation. So how do you create social proof? What are the nouns of social proof? To me, there's some kind of obvious stuff, and that's like putting case studies on your website. It's part of that, being a media brand. There are having a customer reference program where you can have folks actually talk to each other. It's a deeper way to weave that social proof through perhaps your sales cycle. Then there's, the way people talk about you on social, especially for B2C brands. And, there's ways to co-opt this through influencers, but really when you get that authentic drive of people really loving you, it feels very different on social networks. And then I think you have review sites, which are just super key to growth nowadays, because that's where a lot of us go. And when we search, those are things that actually rank exceptionally well in Google because people trust them and Google knows that they perform well. So I look at those 4 case studies, reference programs, social proof, and review sites as really kind of the key new nouns of growth. And of course, yes, all the old stuff, content marketing, all that, it still matters. You still have to do it, but it's become a matter of layering on this new stuff if you want to actually grow and compete in a modern world with a modern customer.
Great. Can you go one step deeper on reference programs? And the reason I ask is, we've had various efforts here, whether it's inside our support site, by customer request. Years ago, I started a couple Facebook groups, customers like, we want a place to connect with other people. And talk a little, in my experience, you have to do a lot of lifting to get them to participate and to speak to one another and add value to each other. Can you share some of the things you've maybe learned along the way with regard to those types of programs?
Absolutely. So the first thing is the same thing that you just said, Ethan. It's hard. Actually producing a successful customer reference program is quite a bit of work. And I think that companies actually should be choosing, do we want to invest somebody's salary and time in a customer reference program, or do we want to invest that in more blog posts or whatever it is? I think there's really a trade-off there, because doing this right is heavy lifting. So the ways that I've seen work are basically to use some mechanism to identify within your customer base people who love you. If you have a lot of customers, or if you deliver a really good experience, either way, you're going to have some people, at least one, that's a rabid fan. You really want to start with that first one, and that's your very first kind of customer reference or referenceable point. You want to find that population, whether it's 1 or 100 or 1,000. You want to identify them and tag them in some way. And then to your point, you need to cultivate and create some system that kind of pulls them in as a virtuous cycle from that. There has to be something in it for them, whether it's just being recognized as a star customer. That could be enough. Sometimes it's about, hey, if you do one of these calls, we'll give you a $50 Amazon gift card. Different things work for different businesses. Step 1 is identifying them. Step 2 is cultivating them. And I think that there is a fair amount of turnover in these things too. So they require a lot of upkeep because it's a big ask. If you ask me to get on the phone or get on a video with a prospect of yours, that's a lot of my time. And so folks get burned out on it, folks turn over, and it does take a lot of kind of cost and effort to keep it going. But I'll tell you, a great customer reference program is just one of the strongest forms of social proof. And it's one of the strongest ways, I think, to really compete and win with the modern customer in this modern era of trust gap. So I would argue that the time a marketing department puts toward cultivating that reference program or any of these other kind of social proof tools is really valuable, but it should be looked at on a trade-off comparison with, should we make that next landing page? Should we make that next ad? Or should we invest that next calorie in customer references?
Awesome. I'm going to guess, just based on that response, that you have some ideas to share on this too. Talk a little bit maybe about things that you've tried and seen, or seen some of the marketing folks at HubSpot try, or maybe it's even bled into services and support at some level. What are some more passive ways to equip customers to be marketers on your behalf? For example, again, just speaking from our experience, we have an affiliate program. We've had it for years. It was one of the first things that some of our first customers started asking for, a decade ago. And yet, 90% of the revenues generated by 3% of the affiliates, and it's in part because we're not equipping them well enough and giving them stories to share and that kind of thing. Have you seen other more scaled programs that aren't necessarily as personal, aren't as much of a heavy ask on the customer side, but is still tapping into that in order to benefit from the positive relationships you've built with customers?
Yeah, there are definitely ways to do this. And so the customer reference program that we just talked about, I would argue is quite a high investment on the customer's part to help you as a business to grow. And so if you now think of it as a spectrum from high investment on the customer's part to low investment, you can start to chart the path. And maybe even higher is like, having a customer come on site to do a reference, but that's quite far on the high investment side. What's on the lower end? To me, that's like a retweet. Right? That's a quick share on LinkedIn or Instagram or something like that, right? And so there's kind of these one-click digital things that are asynchronous on one end, low in time investment, and then there's these synchronous, heavy-duty things on the other end. And so different things work for different businesses, but for us at least, what we've seen works is to understand, again, who those customers are, who are your potential advocates, and you identify them for your kind of normal business operations, who had a great response after a support case, who gave you a 10 on your quarterly NPS, whatever it is, you get that pool, and then you can kind of just throw them these easy opportunities, and you'll find that pool is likely to uptake on them if they're simple. And so if you can send them an email with, say, hey, we just launched this thing. If you want to help us out, here's like a lazy tweet, cut and paste or click here. And it's a simple one-click way to do this thing. And so there's lots of ways to harness the power of that advocacy group. To me, from an operational standpoint, it all starts in the same place. You have to identify your advocates, and that's the normal business process. And then it's just a question of, do you want to make a heavy ask or a light ask? And sometimes it's both. Sometimes there's different types of customers within that population that want to do different ones. And so whatever the lightest possible thing you can do is, that's on the first end of the spectrum. And then things like customer reference programs and all that's on the other end.
Awesome. I want to change course a little bit. You know, what you've seen over the decade there, I mean, just in the way that you're responding, the depth and the clarity of thought around it, you're obviously deeply steeped in a lot of hard-won lessons and learnings and observations, and a very forward-looking company. I mean, for me, HubSpot was really important in my career as I was transitioning out of, a previous industry that I'd spent 12 years in, like what skills are transferable, and all the work that HubSpot was doing was very helpful for me. I've always appreciated and respected your company. Talk about, and I'll take this someplace, 5 or 10 minutes from now, but talk a little bit about your career growth and progression within the company. And I'll tee this up with a few pieces of information and observations of my own. One, I feel like a lot of younger employees want it all, and they want it all right now, right? And I'm imagine that there was some patience and flexibility and stuff in your movement throughout the organization. But you've been there almost a decade in 7 different roles, or at least by title. It looks like it's your second company. You're with Compete for a couple of years prior to that. In undergrad, you were in international relations, philosophy, and computer science. Talk about, how did you land at HubSpot? What has your movement been? And what are some of the things that you picked up along the way that have now led you to be the general manager of the ServiceHub?
So first of all, thank you so much for the kind words on the ways that HubSpot's been able to help you. That's like, it warms my heart. It's a lot of what we think of as our impact over the long term. It's just that's great. I love that. I mean, I guess that I'll share a story or a series of maybe short stories here that I hope can help the listeners. Just like if you're early on in your career, if you're trying to figure out, a few years into the workforce, what to do, or if you're a returner who's coming back from, being out or having family or something like that, hopefully some of these stories can be of use to you guys. So for me, I think one thing that I've learned about myself over the years is that I really like building things, and I like going deep on something and building one thing. So I don't think, as I've learned about myself, I'm not the kind of person that over the course of my career is going to start 50 companies and 4 are going to be great successes. That's not really me. I'm going to help build a few companies and hopefully build them to something I'm exceptionally proud of, that I want my grandkids to be proud of. So there's a little bit in this first step of just knowing who you are. And I think you learn that through experience, but I think you can try to think about, am I the kind of person that works in a lot of places and touches a lot of different things? Or am I sort of very broad? Or am I very deep on one thing? Or am I sort of T-shapes and I do a little bit of both? And so for me, I've been looking, or in my 20s, after a few years of experience, really looking for a company that I could really sink my teeth into and grow with. And I was lucky to find HubSpot in a moment where I really just needed a job. And it was a company that I interviewed with. I felt excited about. It had some buzz around it. Candidly, I don't think I knew what I was getting into when I joined HubSpot. It was about a 100-person company, and my job was to do customer onboarding. I thought it was a job. I interviewed on a Saturday and again on a Monday, and I started working on the next Monday because a friend of mine worked here. And I used to go to parties with people that also worked at HubSpot. This was back in 2010. And so over time, though, I feel very fortunate to have evolved with HubSpot and And basically, I feel as though I've worked at 3 or 4 very different companies. And as you go through the growth cycles that we have, from 100 employees to 1,000, through an IPO to an international company with thousands of employees, you can really chunk that experience off into 3 or 4 very different types of companies. And I'll tell you, working at a startup where it's just madness every day and you're trying to keep up and claw at the earth to make it turn, and every single person is just super focused on that growth, that's a really different type of experience, a really different type of skill set. And working at like a scale up, once you sort of arrive, now you're really trying to scale that growth to the next level. And it's less of a purely visceral exercise where, again, kind of clawing at the earth is not the skill set. It's more about tactical, calling the right strategies at the right time and making the right tactical moves in order to grow. So I think that companies really change over time. And I think that one of the challenges in that growth is actually keeping the focus on the customer. And so the one consistent thing that I've seen, and really from our founders, Brian and Dharmesh, that I've seen over and over and over the last decade, is they are just absolutely obsessed with that customer experience. So the definition that I gave you, Ethan, at the top of the show around what I think customer experience is, it's the reality of the single customer's thread of their experience. That really comes from, I think, our founders' point of view and their obsession with that one customer experience and trying to make that as great as possible. Over time, I've had various jobs doing various things, but that's really been our North Star, even if, the skill sets have changed over time. And I've really learned about myself through the journey.
So good. I'm really glad I asked that. And now I want to get a little bit into how have the customers changed? How has the service function changed? So for you, your initial role was onboarding new customers. Talk a little bit about that journey, specifically for people that are thinking about customer success generally and customer support or customer service specifically. Like, what are some of the things, you defined at a company level, kind of these different chunks along the way. What are a few things, for people that are somewhere along that journey as a company, what does that look like inside a CS organization along that path?
Yeah, great question. So I think at the beginning, when you're just in the primordial ooze of a business and you're a couple of founders, maybe an engineer and perhaps a salesperson, we all sit in the same room. At that point, everybody really understands the fabric of the customer experience. You're doing support, via text message or WhatsApp on the founder cell phones, right? It's like everybody's really plugged in. And then there's a very interesting moment that happens when that business hires the first person whose job it is just to work with customers. So you hire, a VP of customer success, or you hire that support rep who's just going to clear the queue at the end of the day, whatever it is. Because now what you've done is you've taken that responsibility, this kind of holy responsibility of customer experience, and you've moved it from founder level to employee level. And that's like this first really big change that I think is a super interesting one. And it means that first hire is really, really key, because that person is also going to really define the genetics of your of your service department and the nature of your customer experience after that. So that's like a really, really key moment. The other key moment that happens after that, and then there's one more after following this one, is that you go from one person to a set of people, and those set of people start to do different functions. So, you hired a support person or two, and they just kind of did stuff. And then one day you wake up and you realize, oh, I have one person whose job it is to make our new customer successful, and I have another person whose job it is to clear the support queue. And now you've specialized, right? And that point of specialization is interesting because you start to develop like expertise. You start to develop the way at your company of doing, say, onboarding, of doing support. And I think that's where you start to develop practices and you start to get really opinionated about, what does a new customer experience look like at my company? And that's a very exciting time, I think. And then that's stage 2. So it goes from just everybody does support to starting to get specialized. And then stage 3 is really about, the customer experience and customer success and the customer outcomes becoming the culture of the company. And so there's really kind of a third level here where customer experience becomes the core of the mindset of every single person. And everything you do, you track back to customer experience. So every time you do a sale, every way that you make decisions about your upcoming annual strategy, whatever it is, you really value the customer experience and you don't kind of let the tail wag the dog of saying, oh, how do we just grow a little more? We'll deal with that customer thing later. You really put the customer first at scale. That, I think, that third part is the hardest thing to do because the first one, hiring that first rep, that second one, specializing, all of those happen to you on your journey to growth. But the third one of really making customer experience the centerpiece of your entire business strategy, that takes active effort from your founders, from your executive team, all that. How to make the right hires along the way. A lot of things have to come together to make that work. I think doing that is really what differentiates amazing companies in the modern era from okay ones. And I want to work in amazing companies that really care about customers, put the customer experience at the center of everything they do.
So you've already mentioned several ways that third piece is the thing. We're at that door, right? Like, we're at that point now, we're maybe 140 people. And we're at that point where we have a lot of folks with direct customer experience that are, a few months on the job and a few years into their career. And so how do you bring back all of the essence, like the deep motivations and the intention, all that? And you mentioned, the founders hiring well. I assume that it's baked into some of the onboarding, but what are some other practical ways that people can infuse the rest of the organization with a sensitivity toward customer experience and its value? And again, just double back on customer empathy. What are some practical ways that you all are raising that up inside the organization day to day, week to week?
I love that question. I love it, especially because you use the word sensitivity in there. And that's really what it is. And so what you want to do is you want to cultivate a culture that is sensitive to the customer. And the way that you do that, the way you create that, I think, like the necessary depth of understanding to have that like fine-grained sensitivity is you have to actually do things that don't scale, right? So like when I was onboarding customers at HubSpot, I spent 8 hours a day on the phone with them and I would touch, 100 customers in a week. I was really sensitive to the customer experience. When I was a director of support, with a 50-person team, that was kind of in my rearview mirror. And I spent more time in spreadsheets. I got really good at interviewing and hiring. Good use of my time. I was a good director of support. But that sensitivity to the customer kind of fades away. Even if you can lean back on it, it starts to get in the rearview mirror, it gets a little blurrier. And so the way that I think you really stay in touch, even if you come from a place where you were super like embedded in the customer experience, the way you stay in touch is you go back there. You spend time with customers. You don't just listen to the customer calls. You actually are the person doing the calls. You have to yourself respond to the question from the customer about why XYZ didn't work, or why did this thing go this way, or listen to their accolades about something and the fact that they dislike something else. You have to create that emotional state in yourself and have a really high-touch relationship with your customers. So on a tactical level, what can you do to create that sensitivity? On your executive team, talk to a customer every month as a team. It doesn't scale. It's the world's most expensive support call in certain ways, but do it because it will create that sensitivity and it will like kind of shake you out of your normalcy and it back into the customer's reality, back into the customer experience. If you're in product, right, and you're doing research and, it's kind of quantitative, make sure you're coloring it with qualitative research and talk to 10 customers and feel what they feel or do site visits, right? It's about building empathy and that sensitivity. And a lot of that is doing things that don't scale. And so I see our team doing this where our executive team spends actually quite a bit of time with customers one-on-one. And, there's one way to look at it, like, wow, that's a really inefficient use of highly paid people's time. The other way is that's the thing that makes us us, and we would fail without that. And I take that second row, that is like the necessary way to cultivate sensitivity and the empathy is you just got to spend the time with customers. It's just people to people.
It's great. It's one of my curiosities, again, that motivates me within these conversations on the Customer Experience podcast is doing the unscalable. And at a certain point, maybe you do figure out how to scale it. But I think so many people are looking to automate and scale. I'm using air quotes for people not watching video clips, which you can do by visiting BombBomb.com/podcast. We want to scale these things maybe prematurely. I think there are some things, to your point, there's some things that maybe shouldn't be scaled. And there are other things that you can just push to the very, very edge. And it's like, okay, cost benefit, not there. Talk a little bit about that, I guess, from a success and service and support standpoint. Human touch versus tech touch. How do you think about it? Is it purely a calculated piece, or like what are some of your thoughts around when to be truly personal and then when to personalize?
So I love people. I also love machines, right? So I come on both sides of this. I think that people have different skills than machines. Machines are great at some things and people are great at some things. So to me, people are actually insanely flexible and they're very agile. You can walk in the morning and say, hey, Mike, now your job is to do this thing when yesterday was this thing. That's much more difficult with a machine, or at least a relatively simple machine that you just stood up. But people are really flexible and they're very agile. Machines are great at doing the same task over and over. And they're really good at doing things that people, kind of don't want to do also, right? So to me, how do you take that then, what people are good at and what machines are good at, and create a customer success strategy that blends both? And the answer is, if you have questions about what your process ought to be, so like, say, let's take a new customer and making them successful. If you have questions about what it takes to make a customer successful, that is not a job for a machine. That's a job for a human. Yes, ML can help, right? But a human could just talk to 20 customers and probably figure it out over the course of the week in a much cheaper and more agile way. And so that's kind of the beginning of the story. It often starts with people when you're trying to answer those questions of what ought we to do. Then once you know what you ought to do, then it's time to like kind of blend people and machines into some really cool cyborg thing and start to augment the productivity of people and start to move some of the simpler work, more repeatable work off of their plate. So they found there's an email that they send every time and it works really well. Cool. Let's not have the person send the email. Let's have the machine send the email. That should come from a CRM or a lifecycle management solution or something like that. Over time, as the people figure out more and more things and more of it falls into kind of like repeatable, successful stuff, machines are great at that. Over time, in fact, even that whole process, perhaps onboarding itself might get fully automated. But I'm a big fan of really starting with people, because people are agile and flexible, then over time layering in machines, and more over time that becomes more mechanized. The trick in that is that sometimes there are changes that happen, either exogenous changes in the marketplace or the way humans are behaving, which we talked about a little bit at the front of the podcast, or maybe you change your pricing or your packaging or there's a new competitor, and that can really come in and create like some waves that you then have to go back in with people and refigure out. It kind of kicks you back to the beginning of this process. So to me, you start with people because they're flexible. You automate over time, and you look at each one of your processes individually somewhere along that spectrum. And then you need to kind of have a hygiene process for making sure that, in fact, yes, these are good, and you're not fooling yourself into thinking that you've got it all figured out. You're staying aware, you're staying in touch with the customer, and you really are keen to understand what the experience consists of, even when you have automated a lot of it away.
So good. That hygiene process is so easy to miss. This idea that we do need to carve out the time or to make a process to double back and review and make sure that this all works. The way I heard that is grossly oversimplified. And if anyone enjoyed that as much as I did, just hit the bounce back button and listen to that response again, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there. To really dumb it down, it's the machine is going to operate against a rule set. The rule set needs to be written, and humans are in the best position to learn and take some of this complex information, put it together, the nuance and the detail, fold it together into the rule sets that the machine operates by. Periodically check it and make sure that the rule set still applies and that the machine is still doing its job. I'm going to hit you with a couple other just kind of themes or high-level questions before wrapping the way I always like to wrap the show. And one of them is based on a word that I saw on the ServiceHub website. It's something I've been thinking about quite a bit. There are a number of books written with this in the title. Talk a little bit about friction and frictionless. Talk about the frictionless experience. And what triggered that for me was that, this blend of both and human and machine is how I think we get best to frictionless. But what are some of your thoughts around friction, frictionless?
In my view, friction is a piece of the customer experience, and it's something customers feel throughout the experience, sometimes more than others. So, for instance, if I want to engage with your company to accomplish a certain thing, and I can't do it the way that I want, I experience friction. So it's really a very customer-centric kind of theme, this friction thing. And different customers and different businesses have different definitions of what friction is. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. For instance, if I wanted to, sign up for Spotify, I don't want to talk to a person. If Spotify made me talk to a person to sign up for it, I would consider that friction, and I would be less likely to sign up with Spotify. If I wanted to cancel my Spotify account and I had to talk to a person, I would consider that friction, and that would make me more upset on the way out the door. But if I wanted to buy HubSpot, enterprise class software, in order to do, CRM or help desk or something, I might actually want to talk to a person. And in fact, if you pushed me to a self-service purchase experience, I might not like it. I might actually want to talk to a human being in order to make my decision. And so that's a case in which sometimes buying and doing that self-service, that's about reducing friction through machines. Sometimes it's about reducing friction by enabling the human touch. So once again, it's understanding your customer in the moment, what they actually need, and finding the path of least resistance for them. Anything else is creating friction. And so for different businesses, it's really different things. There's high considered purchases, low considered purchases. There's times where we really want consultation and advice. And there's times we want to be left alone and just do what we know is right. And I think understanding your customer, or even your segments of customers, sub-personas within your customer base, and try and really, I think the key verb is to match the way your customers want to be treated with the channels and the mechanisms that you offer. That's how you reduce friction. You do that through frictionless selling. I think there's a lot of ways to reduce friction in the sales process. You do that for frictionless service. so that people can get their own answers when they want, but also have the help they need when they need it. And there's all sorts of ways across the life cycle to reduce friction. And I think nowadays, the brand with the least friction wins. That's how you create a great customer experience. That's how you grow. That's how you beat the competition. It's less about even having the best product. It's more about having the best experience, more about having the lowest friction.
100% agree. That's an easy story for a satisfied customer to tell, right? Like, I went in with this opportunity or this problem or this challenge, and guess what? It was unlike all the other ones. It just like got resolved, or I got to completion right away, and it was easier than I thought, because the expectations around a lot of this stuff are so low, and this friction zone is like moving so quickly. There's a lot of progress there. So I think expectations will change rapidly, but we're still maybe in a window where it's not that hard to exceed expectations. The other place I wanted to go here quickly is video. So it turns out we both send a lot of simple, personal, unscripted videos to connect and communicate with people more effectively. We swapped videos prior to this call. So when you came on, I was like, hey, it's Mike. Talk a little bit about why you like video and maybe even how you've seen it be successful within your support efforts.
I just see the progress of video as a technology over the last, 5 years or so. It's been really fast, and it's a fantastic way to humanize experiences in a world where I think we're really hungry for human experiences. And so, we started probably way back in 2014 or so in our support team using video as a tool, especially when we realized that we're 2 emails into a ticket, but man, this could get really gnarly. Let me record a 2-minute, we called them video voicemails because we kind of sent them along with a little bit of text. And those just like the opportunity for surprise and delight in those is just amazing. People don't expect it. It's still novel enough that it kind of feels new and fresh to the recipient. And it can help you get over so many, I think, hurdles that technology imposes. Like when you communicate through email, there's always back channeling. You read the email, okay, how should I respond? How should I craft this? There's all this like inner monologue. You just dispense with all that. When you're on just a phone call, you never know what's going on. Is somebody like Googling something on the side or wwhatever? Like synchronous video can get away from that. You leave somebody a voicemail, you don't know if you're actually communicating what they need, but when you accompany with video in your face and intonation in your voice plus your face, it just really enriches it. So we've just seen video as a tremendously useful ways to shortcut and save time, but simultaneously actually get better outcomes for everybody. It's just like good things come to those that are more human, and video nowadays I think is a technology that really enables humanness well. Who knows what's next? Maybe it's like, augmented reality or VR or something. Like there's something next that'll be the thing. But I think right now in this moment, and probably for the next couple of years at least, video is a really, really great way to humanize your sales experience, your support experience, whatever it is, and just shortcut a lot of the stuff and just work person to person to get to where you want to go.
So good. And all it takes is getting past that, that tense, that challenge that people feel in crafting the right response. And did I get the tone right? There's the same thing with getting comfortable on camera. But once you move past that, I love what you offered there. First, the person that's more human wins. But then also you can save time while improving the outcome once you get past that basic comfort of recording and sending videos. Mike, this has been awesome. A ton of value. I know I kind of took it a little bit all over the place, but I know that people are going to enjoy the conversation and play back very, very much. Before we go, I always love to give you the opportunity to thank or mention someone who's had a positive impact on your life or career, and to mention a company that is doing customer experience really, really well.
Yeah, so I think one of the people that's had a really formative role in a lot of the conversation we've had on this podcast today is Brian, my CEO. And he's somebody that's had an incredibly tight focus on the customer throughout our growth, but he's also somebody who I've been in reasonably close contact with for now 10 years. And he's one of the most adaptable human beings on the planet. And I'm constantly impressed by his consistency of focus, but the new tools and new levels that he's been able to reach in his job function, which as CEO of a software company has changed from founder to now, a CEO of a global public company. And it's very impressive to watch him, but also watch the customer focus. And he's been a great mentor to me in helping me make the right decisions and, sort of grow my career too. So that's on the mentor side. A lot of what I have to say is sort of, shared with Brian in terms of, tonality, right? And then on the customer side, or excuse me, the business side that I think are really interesting. I find that the place where customer experience is most important is where the thing that you're selling is a little bit of a commodity, right? You can get it in a bunch of places. And the more competitive the industry, the more customer experience today is causing there to be winners and losers, standout winners sometimes. So when I look at that, I think of some industries that are kind of like old school industries, right? I look at like the mattress industry and what Casper or like, those kind of quick shipper mattresses are doing with customer experience, making sure you're having a great experience. But an industry that I really, really like is actually the makeup industry. And there's two brands in there I want to call out in particular. One is called Ipsy and one is called Glossier, right? And these brands are selling makeup and they have a brand identity. They have such amazing pull-through of that brand identity from their website to their Instagram to their service, their Twitter. It's just so consistent. You feel like you're talking to a person that has a real identity. I think they've done an amazing job of cultivating themselves in terms of personas and delivering a customer experience that's really in line with what their customers want. So I love those industries. I love those brands.
Great recommendations. Hey, if someone wants to follow up with you because they want to see what you're sharing and connect and communicate with you, or they want to check out the ServiceHub, or they want to check out HubSpot, where are some places that people can connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so if you want to get in touch with me, I'd love to talk with you guys, especially if you made it through the entire podcast. Let's definitely talk. Follow me on Twitter at Redbord, my last name, or LinkedIn. Easy to find there. If you want to learn more about the HubSpot Service Hub, go to HubSpot.com/service. It's a bunch of information there. And again, be happy to talk to anybody about their experience with customers, growing and scaling teams, or service software, whatever. I love this stuff. And thank you guys for listening.
Awesome. And I do want to double down on what Mike just shared with you as a listener. If you got this deep into the episode, you probably have a ton of ideas. Mike has just made himself available to you. And I'll say, as someone who does the same thing, not nearly enough people take people up on the opportunity. So I know he's sincere about it. And so if you have some ideas or questions or anything, reach out to Mike. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you for your time, Mike.
It's an absolute pleasure, Ethan.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If so, definitely connect with Michael Redbord on LinkedIn. You can also connect with me, Ethan Beute, that's spelled Beute. And if you want to go deeper on this episode or any other, you can always watch video clips and get summaries, takeaways, links out to some of the things we talk about by visiting BombBomb.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening to the B2B Growth Show.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.